Hi Tubies, it's Thursday here on Pagan Perspective and I'm your hostess Arianda Ravenheart. As usual, the question and the sender is in the box below, along with a link to my personal channel. So, this week we are discussing the gods and goddesses that we work with in our personal paths. And I'm going to be talking to you this week about Hades and Persephone, who are my matron and patron god and goddess, and also a little bit about Demeter, who I've been working with recently. If you like what I'm talking about, or if you want to know about my interactions with the gods and goddesses mentioned in a little bit more detail, I have recently been discussing this on my personal channel and going into detail about the gods and goddesses in separate videos, because that is something that I'm working on at the moment. I've not, up until recently, I've never really worked with the god and goddess in a personal way, so I've never really called upon specific aspects of deity or specific names, specific characters, and that kind of thing. To me, god and goddess is more than any one individual god and goddess, but the aspect of god and goddess is, you know, the characteristics mentioned from different pantheons, and the many aspects of god and goddess, the many different named gods and goddesses, I believe are all ways of relating to a singular god and goddess who are part of a higher universal energy. Again, this has been covered before. This was covered in the Concepts of Deity video that we did 2 weeks ago on Pagan Perspective, I think. Maybe longer than that, but I think it was a couple of weeks ago now. So watch that if you want to hear more about god and goddess as a whole. So first of all then, how did I come to find these personal aspects of god and goddess? In the early days of my path, before I'd settled on working with any one particular god or goddess, how many times can I say god and goddess in this video? Before I'd settled on working with particular aspects, I used to call upon god and goddess just as the male and the female attributes, just as masculine and feminine energies, and didn't necessarily have a name to put to that, didn't have a specific image in mind when I called upon that energy. And so it was very hard for me to actually feel their presence in the circle, and a lot of the time it felt like I was going through the motions but not actually causing any energetic change. And for a long time it felt like I was talking to an energy that I knew existed out there, but I just wasn't communicating in the right ways. Once I started working with aspects of deity, especially when I started working with deities that I knew had like a particular energy that I wanted to introduce to my life, something that I wanted to work with specifically, then I felt myself aligning more with that energy, because I was projecting more specifically the needs that I had of god and goddess. So I was projecting, you know, what I needed help with in my life, particular aspects of myself and my personality that I wanted to work on, and then that attracted that kind of energetic response from god and goddess. Hades and Persephone are typically associated as being dark gods and goddesses because they are, you know, the rulers of the underworld. Hades is lord of the underworld and Persephone is his bride. I don't know whether anybody knows the mythology, but if you don't, then look it up, because I will be just referring to the mythology, assuming that you know it. So have a look at that if you want to find out what I'm talking about. So for me, the main role of the god is being the physical that is on the earthly plane. So everything's body is made up of god energy. But also I think that he is the protector of the loved ones that have passed on, and he's sort of the shepherd that moves them from one plane of existence to the other. He helps them find their way back to goddess and back to source. Again, this is all covered in Concepts of Deity if you want to read about it, if you want to hear more about that as a whole. So for me, the idea of Hades being the guardian of the underworld, being the protector of souls, was a very moving image to me. I don't really feel that he is a dark or a menacing power. I believe that he's, greatly misunderstood. This is from working with him personally, from getting to know his energy that I call into my circles. Other people might relate to this god differently. Other people might be intimidated by his presence, but I've come to know him and respect him as very much a king, a ruler, a quiet presence as well. He doesn't really have much to say to me personally, but I just get impressions of him from time to time. I do hope to work with him more closely as well. I've only really done personal work with Persephone and Demeter so far, but as I said, it's only been recently that I have been taking on actual named personalities of god and goddess rather than referring to them as a whole and a general before. So he's very much a quiet background presence to me, and he's the kind of misunderstood person, but he steps up and he takes on that role that not a lot of other people would want to do. He does look after those loved ones passed on. He deals with death. He has to confront that because that is his role, and it's not something that is particularly pleasant, but he does that anyway. And I think that made him like a deeply saddened god, a deeply regretful and lonely character. And then when he met Kore the maiden, he was taken so much with her beauty and her exact oppositeness, her warmth, her joy of life, her compassion, that's when he kidnapped her and took her to the underworld, because he just couldn't be without that warmth and that beauty, because he'd never experienced that before. And that is why he kidnaps her as the youthful maiden, and then she descends to the underworld, learns all that she has to about the other world, and then comes to love him and comes to appreciate his role and his job. And that's when she ends up falling in love with him and agrees to remain there as his bride, and then is returned at spring to her mother, who is then overcome with so much happiness that her daughter is returned to her. That's when the fruits and the blossoms and things return to the earth in spring because of Demeter's joy to have her daughter back. So this whole mythology that binds Hades and Persephone and Demeter together, it fits really well with the Wheel of the Year, and that is something that I incorporate into my practice being a Wiccan. So that whole image to me of Demeter, Persephone and Hades very much turns the Wheel of the Year for me in my personal path. And the relationship between Hades and Persephone that I just described is how I interpret that personally. When it's covered in Greek mythology, it's a lot darker than that. It's Hades kidnapping Kore the maiden, who is Persephone in her maiden form, and then taking her to the underworld and raping her, and Demeter is heartbroken, and it's a lot darker and a lot more menacing than that. But I've incorporated the Persephone Hades mythology into a lot of other Wiccan writings, such as the Descent of the Goddess, when she's whipped with the scourge in the underworld and then comes to end up loving the god, along with a lot of other Wiccan mythology. But I've basically blended all of those things to create my personal representation of god and goddess that I refer to as Hades and Persephone. But it's not the same god and goddess that's mentioned in mythology. Like I say, it's a blend of everything that I've studied and also my personal work with those energies. I have genuinely no idea whether anything I've said makes sense to you or not. Because when you're talking about something as personal as your relationship with god and goddess, there isn't really a train of thought behind all of this. It's more to do with the emotions that you have in response to those energies, and that's not something that's tangible. You can't really explain that to another person. But if you do find this interesting at all, then as I said, it's mentioned in a lot more detail on my personal channel. I have a video about my relationship with Hades, I have a video about my relationship with Persephone, I have a video on my work with Demeter, and also there is going to be some stuff coming up in the near future, because I'm still working with Persephone at the moment, and I will be for the rest of the waning half of the year up until Yule, and then I'm going to start working more personally with Hades and God in general. Because I don't really work with masculine energies, just being a girl, and that's just how it is, unfortunately. I've worked with goddess energy mainly up until now, and I think it's time to give Hades a shot in the light. So yeah, bit rambly there, but as I said, it's covered in many other different videos if you want to check it out in any more detail, and I hope that at the very least this has been interesting to you. So until next time, may you blessed be.